Welcome, welcome. Very excited to have everyone here. Looking forward to this conversation. I'm Cathy Liska with the Center for Coaching Certification and with Coach 123, and I'm an MCC coach. Pandora.
Hi, I'm Pandora Ray. I'm also with the Center for Coaching Certification and Coach 123, and I'm a certified professional coach.
And master coach and coach specialist and
On and on.
right. Right. And the star of the conversation today, very excited to have you here. Wyetta, tell us about you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, thank you, Pandora. Thank you, Cathy. I am Wyetta Ford, and I'm a master certified coach. Super excited to be here today about this subject. I have tons of experience in HR, and that led me to this passion around coaching, working with clients, and also a passion around assessment. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Excellent, excellent. And that is what we are here to talk about, assessments, using assessments. And what's really great is Wyetta's coming with the perspective of being the coach using assessments and from the organization side. So we're gonna gain a lot of insight here. The first question, Pam, I'll give it to you. You wanted to ask this one.
Sure. I would like you to tell us what assessments are.
Excellent. Great question. Let's start there. Assessments are tools that are used throughout multiple organizations, throughout multiple coaching programs that really identify certain things. In particular, it could identify your motivation, certain personality styles, certain personality preferences. It's normally in 2023, we do a lot of this on a computer. I can think back to days when you were doing it on paper. Thank you that we do it on computer now, but typically it's a series of questions. Sometimes they're binary questions where you're picking this response versus this response. Sometimes you're picking the answers or results based on a scale. But ultimately, depending on what sort of assessment it is, the goal is to give us some sort of indication around ourselves if we're the one taking the assessment, right? Or the client in this particular case.
Awesome.
Now, what I can tell you is it's not a test. So I never, ever use the test. That's number one, the word test. I'll never use the word you're taking a personality test, because normally when you think of test, you're thinking of correct or incorrect, right? That's not what the purpose is of a personality assessment. So making sure we use that proper terminology is really important too.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. What types of assessments are there?
Great question again. Yeah, there's all kinds of assessments. I've worked with assessments that determine culture. I've worked not necessarily national culture, but more like culture in terms of your preferences on how you like to operate. There are motivating assessments. There are assessments out there that can give feedback, what we call 360 assessments, right? Where you get to get a full circular view of this person, their perspectives, their motivations, their strengths. There are multiple types of assessments out. What other kind of assessments have you worked with, Cathy?
Well, you mentioned one earlier, the personality assessment. You mentioned motivators, also the emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence.
And then there's an emotional intelligence 360, which is really fun. The leadership, and then there's a leadership 360 that can be very helpful, getting other people's perspective on that person.
Yeah, there are also team assessments.
Team assessments.
Function together, and something really quite new in the last couple of years is social intelligence, building upon the emotional intelligence. There's just a plethora of things. It's overwhelming. The industry has just exploded.
Yeah, it has. I was doing some research, and there's over 2,500 assessments currently on the market. So as a coach, as an organization, even as an individual, you ask, what assessment should I do? A lot of them are built on some of the principles from Freud. They have a lot of undertones that are very similar. It's maybe the delivery that's a little bit different in terms of the words that they use, or the way that they categorize different sorts of preferences or styles. But There's a lot out there. There's a lot, but Pandora, you mentioned an excellent point from a corporate standpoint. It is, if you're a coach that's doing corporate work, the team dynamic of these sorts of assessments can be really impactful. I'm a fan again of looking at the assessments from a strength-based approach. And when you look at your team and you can say, this is what my team looks like. Is my team diverse? Not diverse necessarily in terms of cultural or gender or nationality, but in terms of the way they think and they approach things. It's a really powerful tool. Thanks for bringing that up. I forgot about the team impact of these kind of things as well, if you're doing group coaching or some sort of engagement that's similar to that.
Yeah, one of the assessments being the DISC. And if you pull a DISC on each individual, you can pull the group report for free. Or the group report for free. So it's really a fun tool.
Yeah, you have it plotted on the graph, and yeah, it's powerful also because sometimes teams are not performing in a particular way, and then it's obvious because we don't have anyone that has that as their particular strength on our team, or we perform really effectively in this way and we can use some help. It's a really great tool and a way for groups to come to an awareness that's really important when it comes to coaching.
When you say you use it based on strengths, how are you identifying that? How do you define strengths-based approach?
Yeah, my perspective on assessments is that what's most important to me is that a client understands that there's no right or wrong with these sorts of assessments, that whatever your style is, your preferences, the way you approach challenges, what motivates you is all a strength. And that those are the things that we want to build on. Now, granted, in a coaching process, you also can identify, or in assessments, you can identify some areas that someone may want to improve in. And I believe you can improve in whatever way you want to. It doesn't have to be your innate way of working to improve in that way. But I find it very powerful with individuals to focus on the strengths and to use that language versus the negative language of, our deficiencies is it being the focus a lot of times when we get into discussions. Your strength is powerful, and there's lots of ways your strengths can help you build on some of the areas that you may want to work on that some would call a challenge or, an area of improvement or something like that.
Yeah, it fits within the coaching models that we use too, addressing what the benefits, the pluses, the positive language.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
move that needle going forward.
Yeah. So how do you decide whether or not to use an assessment?
I think like every other tool, it's working with the client to see what their intentions are regarding the engagement. To be fair, and a lot of professional coaching arrangements, corporations are requiring assessments as part of the experience. So if I'm talking about in that sort of environment, it's a requirement. The client rather knows that this is what is part of their coaching process. So that's one bucket. But if we're talking about individual one-on-one coaching, then it's a tool that can be explored with the individual. And I find that sometimes people in coaching really don't know what to expect. So they're looking for options of ways to engage and start the discussions. This could be an opportunity, a tool rather, that you can use to help them start to uncover, what their focus is for coaching. So it like every other answer, it depends on, who you're working with. But those are two spaces where I find them to be very helpful. And also sometimes when you're stuck a little bit with a client, that they're stuck in not really knowing how to move forward, I think that they can be so powerful in opening up conversations that even in those moments, an assessment could be very useful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's which is actually speaking to the next question of when you use an assessment. And it's the same answer. It depends. You're working with the client. Is it going to be helpful? Is it not? When's it going to be helpful? Yeah.
And it also being aware of the type of assessment. So some assessments can give you a starting benchmark or a starting place. And then you can see progress and the next, let's say after the coaching agreement or arrangement has ended. But then there's some assessments that even if you take the same test again, you're going to spit back the same results because their philosophy is they believe you are who you are. And the first time you answer the questions, that's who you are. So for a coach, for a corporation, for an individual, be aware of the type of assessment and your intention behind the assessment on the front end so that you can experience this tool and in the way you see fit.
How is confidentiality managed in this process? I know that some organizations want to onboard with an assessment or do performance management based assessments, and that sort of gets a little sticky there because I would think there's some legal issues or confidentiality issues involved there.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting because in particular, I work in a global organization where GDPR, for instance, is very, very strict. And so this does start to cross some lines and questions always appear in relationship to this. When you think about that, the individual divulging this information is where it has to start. But on the other side, I know of global organizations that you take a particular assessment and you walk to that person's office and their results regarding their personality style are at the front of their door. So I think the coach has to be respectful and cognizant of this. And that would be for any other sort of confidentiality conversation we're having, is the clarity on the front end is what's mostly important, to respect the relationship between the two of you.
That's helpful because it reminds me what we're really talking about is the use of assessments in a coaching relationship,
Right.
rather than the broad organization.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. And as you said, sometimes in organizations, if HR is giving the assessment, then HR has that. They have
Yeah.
the results. Whereas
Yeah.
if it's an external coach, the coach gives the assessment to the client, and the client may or may not share it with anyone else.
Exactly. Very, very good point. I worked with a particular organization where part of the coaching was the acknowledgement with the client, with the business client, that the person had the ability to share or not share. So even in working in a corporation, again, upfront, making that very clear is what's key. But you're right. If HR gives the assessment, you're doing this. You're doing the assessment. That's very different than the one-on-one coaching.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Share some examples of how you've used assessments and what's resulted from their use in your coaching.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about one particular example of an individual that started our coaching experience because of challenges in communicating with coworkers. From this person's perspective, it was attesting it a little bit to some cultural differences, and was sort of confused about where to go next, but was really excited and enjoyed test taking, really loved education, had in prior conversations talked to me about liking, kind of getting into how people think and why they think and this. And a lot of our conversations often led to, why does someone think like that? What would make this person do that? So that's what made me offer this as a tool to use. What do you think about this? The person immediately jumped on the opportunity. And I saw some really clear moments of aha with this individual, not because, well, no, there were some definite blind spots, that how this person was perceiving some of their motivations was one way, but the conversations around awareness on how other people may be perceiving those type of interactions just lit up the person's conversation, mindset, or open their mind to, I'm not the only one in this relationship, and my perspective is not the only one in this. And I actually have the chills thinking about it, because to this day, we all have those experiences in coaching where someone comes back and says, I still think about that conversation. And for that person, it was really impactful to look through someone else's lens, but also be clear about her own perspectives too, own those perspectives, but then consider the world like a more a more macro view of an experience versus sometimes we get solar focused.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. So give us some more examples in terms of how people react to different
Mm,
assessments.
yeah, I can also give a bad example of reaction to an assessment.
Mm,
I was not part of the assessment, but I was part of a leadership training program. So it was a group 360 assessment. And we were on the back end of this assessment that was facilitated by someone else, in particular coaches. And I can say the negative experience was there was not a lot of conversation around these 360 assessments. So 360 assessments, again, are every people that you work with, they're giving their feedback in relationship to working with you. So imagine you are the individual receiving the information that your colleagues think you're difficult to work with, or that they're nervous to come ask you questions. And so my biggest learning from that was that whenever you're a part of certain, frankly, to me, all assessments, that there has to be this intentionality on the front end to make clear what an individual can expect from this experience, but then also really working directly with people on what they're receiving. You can't just hand someone a report and have them read if it's a 360, if it's a personality, if it's a motivators, that coaches could really be this intricate part of helping people process that information and helping them really gain insights from it versus just spitting back, a result to you. I think that was one of the more troublesome. There were people in the room crying. So if you're a coach and you are giving 360s as an example, and really honestly, any assessment, I strongly encourage you to make sure you have a real clear moment with the person receiving the feedback because it's fair to them. And it helps build a relationship too of trust. So I think that would be one of the biggest learnings, that a coach can experience or can understand or take away.
yeah.
What's your process for determining which type of assessment to use?
I in corporate settings, a lot of times they are very clearly outlined. I just saw a recent RFP that required this particular assessment with this number of coaching hours assigned to it. So if we again kind of bifurcate these, we'll have corporate, more organizational sessions versus one-on-one. I think I would personally say as a recommendation that you're using ones you feel very comfortable using. There are many, like I said, 2,500 out there. Being clear on which one you're using and then having real understanding of the test, the process, the feedback, the discussions, the questions to ask is really what would lead me to picking an assessment. I personally don't do assessments that I'm not very comfortable with. Frankly, most assessments require that you're certified to give them. And so hopefully you've went through, some degree of training and understanding around them. But I think that's what dictates which ones I use and what settings.
Does the client have any input into that? Like if I'm struggling, how do you know if I'm struggling with motivation or change management or cultural identity, or how do you get at those sort of discerning conversations?
Yeah, I think it's exploring like we do. We, ask the right questions. There's some assessments to answer the question I'm not very familiar with. So I would probably recommend them to a more experienced person in that particular area if it was one. And not that I would probably do that. I would do that. I would recommend that if this is a focus for them and I'm not familiar with some assessments in that particular area, that this is a resource for that. And I think that's what we do as coaches, right? We're supposed to do that in referring individuals when it makes sense. But to answer the question more directly, it's really exploring their motivation in our interactions and our engagement, and then offering solutions offering options if that's where we're at in the discussion. That's how I generally approach it. I don't know, Cathy, when you have individuals that you're suggesting assessments for, how do you approach it?
So one of the things I like to do, and of course, we give everybody a dashboard with all these assessments. So I've
Mhm.
downloaded all the sample reports.
Mm,
And then there's facilitator guides and debriefing guides. There's all kinds of resources there.
mhm,
So when I have a conversation with a client, it's okay, what do you want to learn? What do you want to gain from it?
mhm.
What information is going to serve you? What are you looking for? And then from there, we can even pull up and screen share on a couple of different sample reports. And okay, these are the kinds of
Mm.
assessments that are available, and they can choose based on the type of information they're interested in having.
Mm, I love that. That's a great point because the dashboard provides you that accessibility to see the samples and then they're choosing. So it's not you prescribing a particular
Yeah.
assessment, but I love that idea.
They're choosing a particular tool that fits right into the coaching process and the dynamics therein.
Very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Very true.
So, Wyetta, we were talking earlier, historically, organizations have used assessments, I mean, for a long time. And the risks have changed over the years. So speak to
Yeah.
the risks in using assessments.
Yes, I think that when you look at the history of assessments, we have to recognize and appreciate that they have been used. Um, what phrase can I use for that? And I'm going to say incorrectly. I was trying to think of.
A politically correct term.
Yeah, exactly. You're recording me, so they've not been used correctly. And there's a chance that our clients have been a part of an assessment that really was used, I'm going to say in some cases nefariously. So, bucketing people in a particular type of way or limiting certain people's options. And when you look back at the history, some of it just seems absurd when we hear the way it's been used in the past. I think we have to be cognizant that that may be someone's story with assessments. However, I'd like to also think that we've moved much further along in understanding cultural differences. Most of these assessments are going to not be so, what word am I going to use? European centric and the type of questions or the way things are phrased. Many tests come in different languages now also, which is ironic to me to think that in the past I would see tests only in English. And it's thinking, well, if this is not the person's first language, is that fair? Is that word really a word they use in that culture? Maybe not. So then we're not giving them the opportunity. But we're in 2023 and diversity is seen very differently. So I'm thankful for that. But as a coach, to be aware that someone can have a different experience with assessments and see it as a test and see it as, oh, I'm wrong or I'm whatever, because of the way this comes back.
Oh, I have a great story to tell you. I was damaged from the time I was in the 7th grade because my mom told me my IQ score was 2 points lower than my brother's.
Oh,
Stupid, right? So
yeah.
now, thankfully, there's so much more science involved in the way these things are put together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
I'm still damaged.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say I think whatever that score was, it must have been pretty high, Pandora. I know you, and you are very, very, very smart.
And the other thing I'm thinking is emotional intelligence is a higher predictor of success than IQ.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And Pandora, you make a good point because immediately people start thinking IQ assessments, aptitude assessments, those sorts of things. But this is something very different. And if you can explain that again, my word today is going to be intentionality. If you can be intentional about that on the front end when you're exploring this with the client, I think the more successful. I think earlier I mentioned to you ladies that, one of the things we hear in technology quite a bit is junk in, junk out, that the person's experience with these sort of assessments really has to do with how they approach the assessment, how open, how candid, how vulnerable they want to be. And part of that has to do with the coach helping them understand the purpose, the intention, showing examples on the front end, like we discussed, Cathy, so that they don't see it as, I'm going to get this report back that says I'm 2% lower than my brother. That's
Yeah. And it's an expanding tool, not a labeling tool.
right.
It's, I've used the term personal inventory.
Personal inventory. I like that. I
Yeah.
like that a lot.
So what are the benefits of using these tools?
I think we've talked about a few, again, if I separate two discussions, more of a corporate discussion, I think it's a powerful tool in building psychological safety for a coach. I think it's a powerful tool in group coaching sessions when you're talking about team dynamics, high performing teams, moving through things with teams. On one-on-one coaching, again, the psychological safety element of it becomes very important if you're talking about an individual engagement. And I think that it's all about, if we think about number 8 in our core competencies, right? It's facilitating client growth. The number one point is, or the number one bullet point says, work with the client to integrate new awareness, insight, or learnings into the worldview or behaviors. I find that to be an incredible benefit with these tools and coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are your tips for maximizing the value of using an assessment?
I think the tips are related to being clear about what tools you're using, definitely preparing your client on the experience. I'm going to steal the idea of sharing screenshots because I think that can demystify some of the experience as a great suggestion. Another tip that I use is once we get to the point where we're talking about the assessments, I want to collaborate with the individual or work with the individual on exploring the results, right? So as an example, in the past, I've said, listen, let's use a yellow highlighter and a red highlighter or pink highlighter. The yellow are the points that really resonate with you and you really feel stick out. And let's highlight everything in pink that you have a little bit more pause for. And that again helps facilitate some discussion. Are these things that you'd like to focus on? And it again feels less like I'm giving you back test results, but it's just a conversation tool. So I think that's another tip that's been really helpful. I've also asked people if part of our conversations are related to other relationships, about considering maybe exploring the result with someone else and having them highlight the things that stand out to them, both yellow and pink again. And that can be a tool that they can use in certain parts. So again, that would be something that we would explore if we were talking about that in our discussions. It wouldn't be something that I would just suggest without some sort of dialogue that led us to that point. But that seems to work, and it always then opens up another conversation, more awareness that can be really useful for a client.
Yeah, excellent. So what are your recommendations for coaches in terms of using assessments with clients?
I think my biggest recommendation is really respecting this tool, and because it really does, like all of our tools, right? And all of our processes, we are really sometimes working with people on very deep, intimate subjects. And this tool, like any other tool, I would suggest that you really spend the time to not just give an assessment and then never explore it again, but really spend the time in diving deeper with people if you are using an assessment. The big suggestion would be that you don't use the assessment and then never bring it up again, because it kind of leaves this thing out there like, well, wow, is my test that bad? Because immediately they're going to go back to a test if you do that. So using it in a complete way, working with the client to explore how they want to use the assessment, also being part of a strong suggestion. But being familiar with the assessment. So when you mention the facilitator guide, really being very clear about how you're using the assessment and the language that you're using with the individual, but putting wrapping it up in some kind of way that really ends up being a useful tool is how they can really be powerful in coaching.
Yeah.
Can you comment on economically, just practically, the cost of these things and the cost of learning to be a facilitator, learning to debrief?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Again, there are many assessments out there, and I've seen them range in price in terms of facilitation. I know some friends that do some assessments that require them to pay an annual fee, for instance, to be to be a facilitator, and it's very expensive. And then there are other tools that are much more affordable. For instance, what you mentioned, Cathy, earlier, I mean, affordable is, well, that's affordable when you compare it to a
Yeah, the
$10,000.
dashboard that graduates receive for giving assessments makes it much more reasonable.
Yeah,
In that regard. So yeah. And what are your tips for organizations around using assessments?
that's a great question also. And the coaching process, again, I think it needs to be very clear upfront how they're going to be used. And I think that I would encourage a corporation to still allow for confidentiality and for the individual to explore and use this tool as they see fit. I know that doesn't always happen. Like I mentioned, I've seen all sorts of versions of coaching that require, others to see tools like this. But I think a corporation should be very cognizant of how they use these sorts of tools, because it's not a test. It's not a sure, there's some things that you can show a beginning and an ending, and that's fair, but it's only one tool in the coaching process. And that would be my biggest suggestion. And it is not, a hammer is no more important than a screwdriver, is no more important than I can't think of another tool.
Pliers.
Okay, yes. Okay, good. It's one tool that you use. It shouldn't be the ultimate tool, and it should never be used in terms of, in my opinion, when we're talking about personality and psychometric assessments, I don't think it's fair to use them with the mindset of right or wrong, bad or good. That would be my biggest suggestion. I see it still in some ways, which is disappointing. But when you have the strength-based approach, that we all come with strengths, they look different, they feel different, they have benefit in different ways. We have areas of improvement, but we all have strengths. Then you have a different scope on these kind of discussions.
Yeah, fabulous, fabulous. And Wyetta, what closing thought or insight do you want to share?
I would like to share that if you're a coach that's not using assessments, I really would encourage you to explore. And there's a lot of tools again on the website that they can give you some insights on how you can use these tools. That I also would, if you're a corporation, say that think about how the coach that you're working with, for instance, can use this in a group dynamic. It is so powerful in groups. And as an individual or as a client, consider what would you want to know? How could you use this sort of, or how will you use this sort of tool rather? And there are plenty out there that your coach can work with you on to help maximize your experience with your coach.
Yeah, fabulous, fabulous. Thank you very, very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and being here for this conversation. It was.
Thank you. Wait, we're done? I wanted to keep going. We can talk about this for 2 more hours. Okay, good. No, thank you, Cathy. Thank you so much. And thank you, Pandora. It's been a joy.
Thank you.